So welcome everybody. Today we're going to talk about I Am That. We're talking specifically about the chapter number 4. I call them chapters. I think that's what they are. These are little vignettes. If you see how I Am That is done, and they're pieces, if you will, from Nisargadatta's actual satsangs. So it makes it kind of interesting when you read them, and remember that they're translated. So sometimes you can get involved in the niggling, if you will, of what means what, and it's funny. I think those are weeds that the American mind particularly loves to jump into. If we get to parse words or talk about, uh, consciousness and awareness and the different definitions, it seems like that attracts a lot of attention. So just be aware that it's translated, and likely you may yourself have a different version, which may serve just as well. So you have to kind of hold what you read sometimes loosely, because um, once you get it kind of working in our language, it works a lot better. So today, what we're going to talk about, it's actually one of my favorite conversations, because it was probably the most difficult thing I ever wrestled with in my upbringing. I was brought up in a world where there were um, kinds of boxes of how things happened. And in those boxes of how things happened, you could kind of always unpack them. And the way that you would unpack them would be what made what happen. That was always how those were unpacked. And so if you went to school and if you did X, then Y would be the occurrence. So if you studied enough, then your grade would be something. Everything had a a feature, and then that feature led to the next feature, and then that feature led to the next feature. And so that was the way life was. And of course, if any of you had a religious background of any kind, then you were steeped in this. Not only was your life happening one thing on top of another, but your whole world then was painted. I mean, God and everything, all of the things that happened within that particular world were now also um, causally connected. If God did this, then that happened. And so that became the style of thinking that, well, all of the entire world culturally has. But um, the Western way is particularly boundaried. It's very defined and boundaried. We that's a particular Western kind of thing. And it's actually, when you go to a lot of other cultures, even though it's true that the Maya, the story that we all believe that we're in, there is one of those for no matter where you go. At least I haven't found anywhere that doesn't have one of those. Um, but our version is very black and white, and the lines are very drawn. So what happens here is that one of the participants in the satsang comes to Nisargadatta and says in the very beginning, "Hey, my question is there such a thing as causation?" Now, of course, Nisargadatta looks at that and says, "Well, absolutely not." He said, "What causation means is a succession of things that follow other things. And actually, when you look at the universe, um, that's not how the occurring of the arising happens. It is how we onboard it and store it, right? So what happens is that causation becomes a function of the mind. And when you look at the non-dual approach to everything, you're going to see that the whole point is to dissolve concepts, right? So concepts are held, and then those concepts are, I like to use the word story, by the way. So when you hear me use the word story, concept is the same thing. By the way, I use the term story just because life, to me, it has a lot of movement to it. And so that movement, to me, that occurs in stories, in terms that, as a word, that's how I feel it. And concepts are always those things that are very still. A concept is like it's very fixed. And so I don't when they use the word concept, I always look at a life and I go, no, there's happening in life, and the story holds that sense of things. But nonetheless, even that, when you look at it, the stories and concepts are an extraction of what we're seeing. So um, this becomes one of the very most difficult steps that one needs to make, um, is to look at the way that we hold causation and we believe that that's how life occurs. All I wanted to get after in the expression was the loosening that happens within one as they begin to dissolve their own concepts. I mean, ultimately, when you make some comment like the universe is not bound by its content and its potentialities are infinite, then you and I both know we would call that absolute awareness. We know that that lies behind all that is going on, and actually it holds all of what's going on as it arises. So what we want to get to is, how do we get out of the box of concepts and stories that hold us in an experience of life that conforms to the stories that we tell ourselves or that we've created for ourselves. Now, we've had a lot of help in doing that. I mean, we have society and cultures and churches and institutions. And so we've had a lot of help in this construction of stories, but it's that construction of stories that covers the piece when you make a statement that says that the universe is infinite and the possibilities are infinite. And so that's where we're headed. So what is it that needs to happen for that move to be made? And for that move to be made, what needs to happen is the dissolution, is the dissolving of the concepts that we hold near and dear. And so that what that does is it 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 makes us begin to look at the world in a different way. So if you know, for instance, as I said earlier, that the mind cannot simply even onboard what's happening out there, it simply isn't built for that, then immediately you have to look at all of your concepts and say, huh, I think any concept that's held in the mind must be limited in such a way that there just isn't a possibility for that to get me where it is that I would like that I'm feeling that the movement wants to have me arrive at. And so if that's the case, then where does the dissolution start? And so what this particular chapter is after, it's after saying, hey, look, one of the things, in fact, probably the thing that we depend on more than anything, is the idea that we really know what causes what. We've taught ourselves to believe that we know what causes what. And as a result, that belief and that story, as we play it within ourselves, covers the possibility of actually the experience, if you will, of apperception or the perceiving with no perceiver, right? So if causation can't be the case, then you have to start looking at the other concepts that you hold, right? In this case, it's causation, and you'll see we'll start talking about the ego and how the ego, the entity of the ego that we believe we are, guess what? Another concept. That concept lives in uh, um, it lives in our stories, right? And so our stories of causation always include this I or ego that we believe that we are. And guess what? The I or the ego becomes one of those concepts or stories that can be simply dissolved. And that's what Nisargadatta is after. And he goes after that. It's really interesting. Someone says, well, what does it take to be born? right? And he says, well, I had a mother. And he says, yeah, your mother really is responsible for you being born, and as is your desire and the desire of consciousness itself as expressed in your body mind. He said, but you also need the earth and the sun. And he goes on to name a few things that need to be present for birth to happen. Now, are those causes, right? Well, they need to be present, right? If they need to be present, then I think we all would say if it needs to be present for something to occur, then normally we would call that a cause. So you and I could sit here and we could create a list, and almost an infinite list. If I said to you, let's make a list of the things that need to be present in order for um, life to arise, birth to happen, right? Well, we could spend probably the who knows, we could spend a long time, and we would have a lot of things that need to be present. And then we could say, okay, well, those are the causative factors. But likely we would then be leaving out a whole nother list of things that just simply aren't even aren't in there. So there literally isn't a way, if you will, to get to the place where, as a mind, you can actually hold what it is that would need to be held. So, what is happening, the awakening piece happens from a place, not the mind. That's what this conversation is really about. Thomas, you had a question?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. So are we saying there's no causation, or are we saying there's too many causations to keep track of? You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
It seems to be a
So
contradiction in it.
there is, and so I think there's probably a couple of ways to look at it. When the Nisargadatta speaks, he'll say, hey, look, there simply isn't causation because there's no way we can arrive at something that would, indeed show that there was. All there is that what we really know for real is this is here now. That's it. That's the entirety of what can be said to be, which is the perception of what is now. So that's where he would go. Um, the other way to look at it would be to say, holding that there's no causation is the piece that creates the space, if you will, for for awakening to occur, because the mind dissolves its own concepts. And by holding that there's no causation, we're not looking for causation or creating that piece that would further hide what's behind it. So you can look at it at in either way. I would probably tell you I'm not sure that we'll come to a place where we know. Go ahead, Michael.
So I saw it was actually a quote today from Ramesh Balsekar, and it was something along the lines of everything is everything is happening all at once, or everything causes everything to happen, something of that nature, where you can't even really get into a specific cause because it takes the entire cause without separation for the thing to function in the first place. Is that what he was? Is that
Yeah. Yeah,
something
and
he
that's
was
what I mean. There's a place here in the end that he gets into, and he talks about the holes. He says to see the universe as it is, you must step beyond the net. The net is so full of holes. Well, where do those holes come from? They come from the dissolution of the concepts that we hold near and dear. The net that we think is so well constructed actually isn't. And so in the end, you get to where what Michael just said, which is this beautiful kind of expression of, hey, it's all happening at once. There's so much that's happening. How is it that, one could even know what that is? And in fact, with the intellectual equipment we have, we know we can't get there. So uh, the pointers that we use are, if you think about them, aimed at dissolving what it is we do construct and what it is we do hold as near and dear, right? That's what the pointers are aimed at doing. But of course, our nature is to ask, how is it really? So Thomas asked this really great question, how is it really? And that's why I tried to tell you there's two ways to look at that. One of them is, what's the thing that allows the dissolution to happen, and how is it really? And how is it really? I'm going to say we can't really, get to. Where's Irina? Do you have a question?
Yes. So he's pointing to something that's beyond the rational, and I know that can sound kind of, the rational is like one realm, and then he's pointing to a different realm.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we talk about that realm
Well,
with
that's
rational?
yeah, that's the problem. It's funny. Somebody asked me a question today because I was talking about the nature of awakening arising in the Western, and how we as Westerners would hold it, right? And that really interested me. And the question was, well, wait a minute, awareness is absolute. There are no boundaries. There are no lines, right? And what you and I would call that is an ineffable. That's the word. And ineffable means not being able to be addressed with words and construction, right? It simply is. So the the act that we're involved in is to dissolve what it is that we do have or we do hold, and recognize that the best we can do is point to the actual experience, if you will, of the ineffable. So the minute, I mean, think about how language works in a way, right? You look out the door and you see it all in one view, right? And it's only when I say to you, hey, can you tell me what that's like? You go, well, there's the sky, and then there's the roof line, and then there's the birds, and then I can see some grass, and I can see some trees. So what we do is, out of that entire picture, right, we pull this piece and that piece and this piece, and we start to put them together in some language to try to communicate that back and forth. But the reality is, you'll never arrive at a place where that description actually meets what it is that the perception is. Those two just will never, no matter how hard the poets try. Because even if in reading the poetry you jump into a viewing place, well, you brought, the perception was brought, right? The words didn't hold that perception. They pointed to or triggered a perception of all of everything that might be contained in someone's pointer, say it's poetry or something along that line. Because poetry is a pointing, it's actually one of the closer things to what it is we engage in the spiritual conversation. The poets are trying to point, the poets recognize there's something out there that can't be, or in here, that can't be held and contained, right? But I want to create something in writing that points to that. And so they try the best they can to hold it, but it can never be held. And when somebody goes, aha, isn't that wonderful? Right? Well, what's happening is they've brought the viewing, right? The perception, what it is that's beautiful, isn't in the words themselves, but in what it is they bring, or what's triggered out of those words. And so that ends up being the exercise that that moves us forward. And as something dissolves, it's like Nisargadatta says, there are the holes there, right? And when you see a hole, then that's what you use in order to experience. Right. It's funny. There's a funny story, and I tell it a lot. But if you would sit with Ramesh, you'd be sitting here like this, and all of a sudden somebody would say, Ramesh, oh my God, really all of this talking isn't necessary. What we should do or could do is just simply sit in silence. And Ramesh would go, you are absolutely right. He says, but you keep asking me questions. So, which I laughed every time, because the human nature, we've been trained to reduce everything. We've been trained to believe that we can take everything and reduce it to a question and actually get something that would reflect something. But what we're always going to get is simply a pointer back to that possibility, which is not in the mind.
So Alan, in one of the things that Nisargadatta said that for me is a beautiful pointer and also kind of starts to open the mind is he says, the universe is not bound by concepts.
Correct.
Exactly.
Correct.
So just
Well,
that, I mean,
yeah.
so then we can say, okay, so then there's got to be reality that I'm bound by concepts.
Yep.
The universe is not bound by concepts. What the hell does that mean? But it
Yep.
does something. It kind of opens the mind.
Well, it does, and you can see how we try to make it so. When I was a kid, we would go to Disneyland, and they had this ride at Disneyland called Autopia. Now, you guys may or may not, you got to be old to remember this ride, but it was just a little kid's car, and you would sit in this car, and it had a steering wheel. Now, the steering wheel wasn't connected to anything, right? But you'd go down the rail, and you turn the wheel, right? As though you're a kid, so you think you're driving this particular car. The car is following the rail, and so you can only imagine the conversation in the child's mind. He hits the first turn, turns the wheel right, the car goes right, and he goes, "What a hell of a driver I am." Probably wouldn't say hell. He goes, "What a great driver I am." Right? Now he hits the next one. He turns right, and the car goes left. And he goes, "Oh my goodness, I need a remedial driving class." Right? That would be right. So no matter what happens in the universe, we conform it to our idea that we are actually controlling what it is that's going on, right? It doesn't matter what happens, we will conform what happens to our story. So when you say that's such a beautiful statement that the universe is not bound by concepts, but that doesn't stop the human being and the mind from trying to make that so. In every moment, the mind is trying to make that so. Now, what I love is in our new world now, we're in the digital world, which is amazing, because what happens is you can create for yourself a channel, right, that only has the stuff in it that basically you like, right? So digital life is serving up this, we can control what's happening in a way that is more effective, probably, or likely more effective than even the mind, right? Because now what we do is, rather than having to puzzle over, oh, it went this way rather than that way, and we create a story around it. Well, heck, all we have to do is create a channel, right, that only delivers the stuff that fits into our story to begin with, right? So it makes it even easier. You don't have to even go, oh, I went the wrong way, because there's never a left turn. If you're on the right channel and you're getting the right stuff delivered, there's never going to be a left turn. It's all right turns, and guess what? You caused it. So that's how that happens. That's one of the beauties of modern digital deliveries is to have it conform. And you notice what's interesting is that everything now works in that direction, right? You want to buy something, well, somewhere they figure that out, and all of a sudden you've got ads for all of that you want to buy, right? So everything that we experience, at least a lot of what we experience digitally, AI. What's AI doing? AI is trying to, in some ways, stay a step ahead of what it is that you're thinking in order to deliver the answer that it is you would like and expect. Right now, it's doing that for everybody all at once, which is kind of nice. I guess we have processing power that allows for that to happen, right? But it's in the service of supporting and creating a story, right, that actually will fit and make us feel like the universe is controlled by us. And so it's that dissolution, that you're ultimately after, is to see, oh, that it can't be. That simply isn't possible that could be the case, right? So in the end, and I'm trying to think, is the end I think Michael posted this on the page, but in the end, I mean, this is beautiful. He goes, he says, one of the many. For everything, there are innumerable causal factors, but the source of all that is the infinite possibility, the supreme reality, which is in you and which throws its power and light and love on every experience. But this source is not a cause, and no cause is a source.
Mm.
Because of that, I say everything is uncaused, right? Because he sees that behind it all, right, is no cause. So if there's no cause in the source, how could there be cause anywhere else along the line? That's where Nisargadatta is going to go. He says, you may try to trace a thing that happens, but you cannot find out why a thing is as it is, which is what we've just been saying, right? No matter how much you can get all the elements of what it takes to be born, and you still would be lacking most of the rest of them, right? And he says, a thing is as it is because the universe is as it is. And so that in the end, that's that same piece that Joseph was just, basically, leaning into. And that, as I say, so causation. So now one can begin to watch the stories of causation that run through the mind. And you can simply watch those, right? You can watch the stories of causation as they ramble through the mind, and know that those simply can't be what is, right? The stories in your mind cannot be what is, right? So as you begin to see that, you can do that. You can do whatever you want. Ramesh used to tell one of his favorite things. He says, go home, spend 20 minutes at the end of every night, pick the thing out of the day that you are most responsible for, and then spend 20 minutes and figure out everything that had to be in place for that to happen. Now, he knew by the time you did that, there was no way that you could claim that you were responsible for the outcome, because of all the other things that you spent 20 minutes figuring out needed to be in place for that to happen, right? There just wouldn't be a way that you could claim that you were the cause, even though you felt responsible for it. Why did you feel responsible for it? Because your story of causation told you that if you did X and Y happened, that you were the responsible cause, and you've lived your whole life with that particular story in your mind, and that story runs its loop over and over and over and again, and it becomes very embedded in who we are. And so this is a chance to actually watch in the mind, knowing that whatever you're seeing there just simply can't be the case. It's only mind stuff. That's all that it is, right? And that's the dissolution, if you will, of your own mental concepts and stories. And that's that. So anyway, that I think that covers it. By the way, I usually will go, I talk for 45 minutes or an hour. And then if there are any questions, I expect questions along the way, which I love. And then I'm always available to hang around if someone wants to stay and have a specific conversation and questions. So my kind of hour has a lot more to do with kind of just the natural amount of time that I chatter, as opposed to me. I'm not wanting to leave, or I'm available. So I just wanted everybody to know that if they were to want to do that I'm here for that for sure. So anyway, any questions? Anything come up? Michael, go ahead.
So, Joseph's question about concepts, as contractions, and I was kind of tying it into last week where someone asked about sitting with the I am, and the I am seems like it may be like the original concept. And how does one sit in the I am in that original concept, but also attempt to get rid, or if you will, of all of the concepts? Like if one gets rid of the I am concept, what's left?
Well, all of the other concepts. Typically we would talk about what the indirect method and the direct method. And what most people do when they start their spiritual search is they they're solving one problem at a time, right? And so that dissolves and there's a happy moment, but it's a little like being at 31 flavors, you know, that number thing up there. Well, there's a whole line of problems. And so the minute that one problem is over, right, the next customer is in line with the next issue that needs to be dissolved, right? So, you know, in fact, Buddha, I think, was famous for saying that that peace only existed from the time that one desire, you know, basically was dissolved and the next desire arose. That was the time of peace that existed, right? That was so the I am, you know, which the way I would say it, I think it's probably similar to how you see it, Michael, which is it's the generator of all definition, if you will. So you haven't, it's I am fill in the blank, right? So instead of saying I am Alan, because that's the establishing piece of that statement. So Alan now is in play, right? I am just means you're sitting on the creator of definition, right? And by nature, I think, you know, what you said, it's funny, it just triggered in me just this really amazing piece, which is, it seems to be a contracting particular energetic, right? So, because what it does is it extracts something, binds it, defines it, and puts it into play. That's what the I am does, right? So that's by nature a contracting style of activity in consciousness, right? And so I think what Michael is after when he says what happens to the rest of it, and what Nisargadatta says when you're looking for the holes, is that they're looking for the expansive piece, right? So dissolution happens, and and I always, when I say these, by the way, I don't know if it's under, over, or around, but under the dissolution is the expansion, right? That then allows for the apperception of all that is. So when the I am is dissolved, right, it actually allows for that apperception of all that is. Now, don't feel like the ego goes away. It doesn't, by the way. The ego has a function. So if I go, you know, hey, Tim, right? If Tim's ego's gone, I'm not going to get anything in response, right? He's a vegetable over there probably. So, but that ego functions, operates, and he would say, yeah, what do you want? Right? That would be the conversation. The question is there an identification with Tim, the small ego, versus no identification, but yet Tim continues as a body mind to operate as an ego in the patterns and conditionings that it's always had, right? So remember, it's the identification or the glue that is what's being dissolved. And when I say that, I mean that's the mental dissolution leads to the consciousness that shaped itself around that mental image or that mental story, right? So that's the piece that holds us in belief that that's what we are, is this individual thing, right? In this case, I'm talking about the ego. But once that's dissolved, right? Now, what can also happen, you know, and Michael knows this one, which is we have experiences which that dissolution happens and the opening happens, right? And then right behind it, the ego arises again, right? So Ramesh used to call those free samples. There's in the history of spirituality, there's all sorts of things. And that's usually a pretty good sign that dissolution is having its effect, right? Some people get distressed about that. They go, "Oh my goodness, it came back." You know, like, well, yeah, it's kind of like riding a bike. You know, the first time you get on it, you balance for the first 100 feet, and then you don't balance anymore. It's a little like that. Dissolution seems to have this nature of opening pieces at times and moments that are just you know, there you are, and then it can close down again. So be aware. I mean, it's nothing to worry about. It's just part of the journey, if you will.
Sorry to ask so many. Oh, go ahead, Thomas. I'll ask my question after you.
Well, I'm just thinking, is this not a challenge to free will? If the thing I feel most responsible for during the day, I really had no effect on it. That seems kind of a big topic to address, but what is
It is, and that's what causation starts, right? In other words, causation starts that conversation. So if you see yourself as simply a body mind that's been entirely prepared by consciousness to act in a certain way, and that everything that arises is going to contribute to an outcome that's already the case, right? Then you and I would say there's no free will, right? Because there's no ego to have free will, but there is consciousness that is dancing each of us to the tune that we've been built to dance to, right? So that's the next piece. And again, right, we're back to that question you asked before, Thomas. And this is a tough question, but is it really the case that it's no free will, or is it the case that holding that there's no free will creates the dissolution possibility for awakening? And I'm okay either way. I would tell you, Thomas, that probably you and I and any other human being doesn't have the horsepower to get to whether or not there's free will, right? I don't think we have that. But you know, we think we ask that question as though we think we could, but remember, pointers are in essence, if it's understood, if the arising of you and everything else is simply consciousness living you, right, then you would be in a space of pure relaxation, right? That space of pure relaxation, right, it implies that one has simply relaxed into the arising, whereas free will normally suggests I'm doing something, so I'm the one that has to do it. Right. So that's where the free will pointer and the causation pointer, the free will pointer and the causation pointer are actually the same thing. One's just looking at causation in the universe at large. The free will is looking at the same idea of causation and how that's created relative to the ego. So but they're the same, they end up being the same question. Hopefully that helps.
Mhm.
Okay, any others? Anybody want to jump in the pool?
Well, would you say that like letting go of the ego then is a sort of non-autonomous action?
Yes.
Is that kind of the bare bones of it?
It is, and I mean, even it's really interesting because then you start to talk about things in an entirely different way, right? So when you take a look at, if you say the way that things happen are simply the way that they're designed to be happened, and that's how they're going to arise, then that's not autonomous just by that particular description. So now you would see Nisargadatta would say something like, hey, there needs to be earnestness, right? In other words, when you're engaged in this, there needs to be this element called earnestness. And so everybody goes home and says, okay, I have to be earnest, right? And all he's pointing to is earnestness is a quality that seemingly always is in the seeker who's in where movement is happening, right? So that earnestness is as non-autonomous as free will would be, right? Humility is always my favorite, you know, because I remember, you know, Osho used to make jokes about, you know, how the priests and all of the religious folks would work really, really hard to be as humble as they could. In fact, they were quite proud of that. And I used to make me laugh that somebody would use humility as the standard for which they would be proud about, as opposed to Ramesh's explanation of, humility is what occurs when it's seen how life arises. Because how could anybody mind be other than humble, right? When they see how that is, right? Because there's good things in you and bad things in you. It's just you come packaged the way you come packaged. So, Michael and Alan may have short tempers. Well, that's kind of how we came packaged. Guess what? That's probably you're going to get some of that. Is that autonomous? No, that's just the way that's the way that existence built those two particular body minds. Go ahead.
I always figured as well that in that letting go thing, that if we had the ability or the control over letting go, we would have done it already. And so
Right.
it is autonomous. It just happens when it happens.
Right. But isn't it funny that when it does happen, how people rush to claim it?
Yeah, of course.
Right. So your thought is absolutely perfect until it happens, right? And then it's like, oh, wow, did you see what I did there? Yeah, it's like the kid in the car. So it's just that's how we're programmed, right? It's like you're programmed to go, I did that, and yeah. But I mean, what you just said was really beautiful. It really was, because it's exactly the case. So the when you take a look at it, I mean. I used to hear all the time that, what's the difference between perfect relaxation and awakening, right? Nothing. Absolutely not, because if no matter where one is in life, if perfect relaxation is there, awakened or not, hey, that's perfection in any given moment, right? And so, do you make that happen? No. That simply is in the arising. And then we track it in human terms and try to describe it, right? And then we confuse ourselves and ask questions about it. So that's how that one runs.